Hello guys, welcome to another video, and we're another day closer to Path of Exile 2's launch, and it's another passive tree video. If you missed the previous two, I captured some of the PoE2 passive tree during my playtest in LA, and I'm covering some of the most interesting nodes for each section of the tree. Today, it's the dexterity area where the ranger starts. We're beginning with Catalysis, which is located in the middle of the dexterity area towards the outer edge. 20% increased elemental damage with attack skills, 5% of physical damage from hits taken as damage of a random element. So we already knew that damage taken as was going to be a thing in PoE2, as it exists on the Cloak of Flame unique body armor, and there also appears to be a section in the character sheet for these stats labelled as damage redirection, which will likely document all of those stats for a final breakdown of how damage is taken on the character. Unlike Cloak of Flame though, the modifier on this node specifically refers to physical hit damage only, so it won't work for damage over time such as bleeding. When you take physical damage from a hit, 5% of that damage will instead be taken as a randomly selected damage type on a per hit basis between fire, cold and lightning damage, which means it's then going to be mitigated by your resistance. I expect this notable to be picked up on pretty much every elemental attack build on this side of the tree, but it's unlikely to be taken on any other builds that won't fully benefit from the node, because 5% isn't really enough to justify the investment of points. Next up, the Elemental Equilibrium Keystone, which is changed a bit from PoE1 and finds itself a bit deeper in the dexterity-aligned area. This keystone has been designed to reward the clever use of alternating elemental damage types. When dealing one type of elemental damage, you'll remove any exposure from that type, and then apply exposure to another type based on the type dealt. For example, dealing cold damage removes cold exposure and inflicts fire exposure. Exposure is a debuff which lowers elemental resistance, and notice that there is no exposure numbers on the keystone unlike the one in PoE1, which would indicate a base magnitude exposure, which is 10% in PoE1. Elemental Equilibrium will be useful in a build that is able to ignite using cold damage, or one that's able to quickly deal cold damage after igniting, applying fire exposure to make the ignite deal more damage. Interestingly, a hit which deals elemental damage of all three elements in one go would remove exposure to all three types, then immediately reapply exposure to all three types. So finding a small amount of flat damage to all three elements from gear pieces may be the way to go for elemental builds with this keystone. Low Tolerance is located close to the middle between the Ranger and the Monk start locations. This one grants 60% increased effect of poison against enemies that are not poisoned. Now we know that damaging ailments will work differently in PoE2. The damage of an ailment is calculated from the hit on the monster's side prior to mitigation, which means all of the hit modifiers are taken into account, and as a result of that, damage modifiers will no longer directly apply to the ailment. The only way to scale the ailment directly thereafter is with modifiers to the effect of an ailment, such as this one. We also know that poison no longer stacks by default, and there will instead be ways to obtain additional stacks. So, this node essentially is 60% more damage for that initial poison applied to the monster, but won't have any effect if the monster is already poisoned. It will be interesting to see if it's possible to shorten the duration of poison to the point where you're able to continuously reapply a single stack. That would make this notable extremely powerful. Speaking of poison, stacking Toxins is located in the middle of the dexterity area and allows you to inflict additional poison at the cost of reducing poison effects by 20%. Notice that this is reduced effect, not less effect, which means you'll be able to counter this downside by obtaining modifiers which increase the effects of poison, as they'll stack additively. This node is already strong on its own, but if you're able to counter that downside, it becomes exceptionally good. Okay, let's take a moment to look at some of the charm-related nodes. First, a new keystone, Oasis. This one is located at an equal distance from the Merc and Ranger starts, right in the middle. Oasis makes it so that you cannot use charms, but provides 30% more recovery from your flasks. Charms are a new, fully automated equipment item which use flask charges and provide utility such as removing bleeding or freeze. It's currently really hard to judge how useful this keystone will be, as it's difficult to place a value on charms. For example, will we be able to replace the utility they provide elsewhere, and if so, how easily? More recovery from flasks is a strong stat, considering that recovery is going to be much more difficult to obtain in PoE2 compared to PoE1, but it's hard to judge this keystone just yet. My initial reaction is that the upside may not be good enough for the loss of charms. Now, speaking of charms, this large cluster at the edge of the tree here has 3 notables which all provide the same 10% increased effect of charms, for a total of 30% increased effect from all 3. There's also a few other clusters in the dexterity area which also provide charm effect. Now, this is a strange stat considering some of the charms we've seen, such as the Staunching or Thawing charm, have no scalable stats on the base item. There's also the fact that charms can't be used by default and are instead activated automatically when a certain condition is met. This leads me to believe that the Pathfinder, or perhaps another Ascendancy, may have access to some kind of interaction with charms to benefit from these sorts of modifiers, but we'll have to wait and see. Now here's another keystone, Acrobatics, which we've known about for a while. However, this is confirmation that the modifier is in fact 50% less evasion rating, not 50% reduced, so that's quite a brutal downside, but I expect this will be a great keystone for boss fights, enabling the chance to be able to evade area of effect hits which otherwise couldn't be evaded. And here's another keystone, Heartstopper, which is somewhat similar to PoE1's Lethe Shade. Take 75% less damage over time if you've started taking damage over time in the past second, and take 50% more damage over time if you haven't started taking damage over time in the past second. So this keystone rewards fast reactions to damaging ground effects, ailments, or anything else that deals damage over time to your character. Remember that each instance of damage over time is not counted separately. Instead, this keystone simply checks if you're taking damage over time or not. For example, if you're inflicted with bleeding and it's the first instance of damage over time on you, you'll take 75% less damage from that bleed and any other sources of damage over time for the following 1 second. But after that second is up, you're no longer counted as having started taking damage over time in the past second anymore. So you'll now be taking 50% more damage over time from that bleed and any other sources of damage over time. To benefit most from this keystone, you'll need to react quickly to any damage over time that you take. Okay, I've left some stat stacking nodes till last. Firstly, Falcon Technique, which is accessed from the middle attribute highway between the Ranger and Monk stars. This notable grants 1% increased attack speed per 15 dexterity, providing a natural stat stacking angle for attack builds right off of the tree. If there's any good uniques which can combo well to provide more value from stacking dexterity, this node will be quite good. We know that dexterity will provide a lot more accuracy rating in PoE2 compared to PoE1, 2.5 times as much in fact. You'll gain 5 accuracy per point of dexterity in PoE2, which is important because of the next notable, Falcon Dive, located further towards the outer edge of the tree. 1% increased attack speed per 250 accuracy rating. So you'll be able to gain quite a bit of attack speed from just stacking dexterity by combining these two nodes. Remember that speed modifiers have been toned back a lot from PoE1, so any kind of movement, attack or cast speed increases will be much harder to come by and found in smaller amounts. But if you didn't want to stack dexterity, you could instead stack strength, because of another notable which I forgot to mention in yesterday's video, as it's located in the strength dexterity area of the tree, but it's not far from the Falcon Dive node, and that's the unexpected Finesse notable, which makes you gain accuracy rating equal to your strength. You can see here in this combined image that these two nodes are actually fairly close to each other, so there's definitely some potential to combine the two, or you could always grab one of them on the tree and anoint the other one instead. And that's it, some of the more interesting nodes in the dexterity area of the PoE2 passive tree. If you've enjoyed this video and want to see more of the nodes elsewhere on the tree, make sure to subscribe for more videos like this very soon. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.